Have you paid your dues? Can you moan the blues? Can you bend them guitar strings? Boy, can you make folks feel what you feel inside? If you're big star bound, let me warn you, it's a long, hard ride. He said, Drifter, can you make folks cry when you pray and sing? Have you paid your dues? Can you moan the blues? Can you bend them guitar strings? Boy, can you make folks feel what you feel inside? If you're big star bound, let me warn you, it's a long, hard ride. If you're big star bound, let me warn you, it's a long, hard ride.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Where'd the old town go? They moved it on north of here in the shopping mall.
Good morning and welcome to Old Town Cleveland here on WOOP FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.woopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553. Debbie Moore, tell us what's going on today.
Well, the sun's shining and it's a beautiful day. How's that?
Sounds good so far.
We're glad to be back with everyone. We appreciate John and Doug allowing us to have a little time off last week.
And I understand they had a good show about the George R. Stewart area.
And I'll have to go on and listen to that. You guys can listen to that on YouTube. How do they find that, Ron?
Well, you can go to the WOOP FM website, which is woopfm.com. And you'll go to archives and click on it, and it takes a minute or two for it to load.
Because it's a big story.
Yeah, and then you'll come up and it'll have all the programs that we record here. We have the Monday night program we record, Backfire, if you want to hear that arguing over and over and over again.
I'm going to remind those fellas on Wednesday morning to remind everybody that they are recording that to be replayed on Saturday morning. Because every now and then someone calls and they're all ready to discuss politics, and I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, and then, the Lights, Camera, Action, is that the name of that?
Monday nights. I listen to that a lot.
A lot about movies, and those guys know. Now, talking about some movie nerds. That's not a bad thing now. But and our special guest with us here today is our great friend and star of Good
Arnold.
Arnold Tarpley. How you doing, Arnold?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Ron has lots of faith in Arnold and I that we know about every building in Bradley County that's over 75 years old. But we're going to try to make it through this today. We're going to be talking about old homes and old barns and anything else that you might see in your neighborhood. Eventually, I'm going to get a book put together that I'd like to have a old picture of a house and a current picture of a house, or an old picture of a barn and a current picture of a barn. Anything that's over maybe 100 years old, we're going to try to put together, and Ron's going to help me and Arnold's going to help me put that in some kind of driving tour so that you could kind of take the book and get out and drive around in the neighborhoods and actually find those houses with a GPS or some kind of device like that. Mm-hmm. And won't that be great?
It will be great.
And I think there's a lot of houses, and Arnold will attest to this, that there's a lot of houses sitting out there on the edge of the road that when you drive by it, you just think it's got the vinyl siding on it and the new aluminum roof, and it's all painted up nice and fresh and stuff. But underneath all that stuff, there might be parts of the building that are log or definitely early timbered wood, cut timber, and people will go, well, it can't be too old because it's, wood from the sawmills. But there were sawmills here when the Indians left. There were 7 or 8 sawmills in Bradley County.
The Judge, my mind just went blank.
Martin.
Judge Martin, thank you. House down on Dalton Pike is one of those examples.
It's an example of that.
Yeah, and it's got a marker on it now. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Mr. Irwin's home up on Walker Valley Road, right?
That's right. And we'd like to see a marker up there, too. And I think we're going to get some kind of marker. And I'll tell you what, hats off again to those folks in Charleston that are working so hard up there. That is one of the most historic places not even in Tennessee, but in America. And it just has not been documented correctly. And some folks about 5 or 6 years ago got up there and they're working hard. And if you've got a little money to donate, the people up at the Hiwassee Heritage Center will put that to good use. And you can stop in up there now and get your stamp from the National Park Service.
That's great.
Right there in Charleston, Tennessee.
I always thought it was interesting, Debbie, is, you've traveled around out to Oklahoma, that there are signs there that you're so far from Fort Cass or Charleston, Tennessee, but there's no ground zero.
There's no sign that I can get my picture made in Charleston, Tennessee, where they people all over recognize that as being one of the main places that the trail started. There's no sign up there to stand. Well, there may be now. I haven't been up there in the last few days, but there's no sign there that says you are 866 miles from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And in Hopkinsville, I had my picture made there with the signs. And then I thought, well, what a disgrace that it's not marked yet. But by George, it's going to be marked now.
Well, that's good. And a lot of historical homes there. And I know in the book Deb's working on, she's talked about, is it's not going to be just these the homes downtown that we all recognize and the beautiful
and
homes.
Love them.
These may be a little farmhouse that's 100 years old and an old barn sitting there. Particularly if they're good stories. And I tell you, the key thing is if we can find a picture of before and after, in other words, a picture of today or a picture of your family standing outside that old house. I've got
that's what we want to talk about.
I've got an example here today. I've got a picture of the Varnell house, the way it looks today, and a picture of a Varnell house with a T model sitting in front of it.
And that would be one up at the Bend of the River Farm in Charleston.
Right.
1920s. The original old house there actually burned in the 1920s. The Saw Paw House, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And they built that house back. Before we get going too fast here, I want to mention that Pleasant Grove United Methodist Church, a half a mile behind the Cleveland Speedway, is having a big yard sale and bake sale today. If you want to see one of the older churches in Bradley County, go by there and they'll let you kind of walk through that building. It's probably from the 1880s, but the church was actually established here in Bradley County, I believe in 1832. But they're having a big yard sale. They're cooking up some hot dogs and stuff here for lunch. Go by there and visit with those fine folks and buy some things and help that little church out. It's Pleasant Grove.
I know where I'm going then, don't I?
Half a mile
I know
behind
exactly where you're going.
The old Cleveland Speedway. And I'm sorry that I have to say the old Cleveland Speedway now.
Right. So no action on that. We go out and show our dirt track video quite often there, and we have not, and people ask us constantly what's going to happen to Cleveland Speedway, and there's no idea what I think. We understand that there could be an auction in August, and will it go, someone buy it, use it as a racetrack? I know I actually have talked to some of the people who've made bids on the property and
that want to run it as a racetrack.
And well, it may or may not be.
It may.
Every day it sits there, it has deteriorated, and the track is in very terrible shape now. So it will take someone with some extra money probably to fix it up. So the odds of us having a speedway in Cleveland, pretty far gone.
Okay, speaking of speedways and such, before we start talking about houses, we're having one of our big showings of It's Dirt Track Life tomorrow at the East Tennessee Historical Society in downtown Knoxville. On Sunday afternoons, parking's free, the museum's free, and our show is free. And that will happen at 2:30 at the East Tennessee Historical Society. Now, if you haven't seen that museum, it takes a lot to impress Ron when you go in a museum. And he really likes to go in there because they always have they have great musical instruments and guns and stuff from the Civil War and just a wide variety of things. And it'll take you just a few minutes to look at everything. You probably need 45 minutes or something to walk through the museum.
Oh, that's just in one section.
Yeah, that's just in one section.
Yeah, it is really one of the better museums I've seen anywhere.
But anyway, we're showing that tomorrow, 2:30, downtown Knoxville on South Gay Street, and we'd love to have you guys come. Like I say, parking's free. You might have to walk a little bit, but there's a parking lot just east. Is that east of the building there? And you might have to walk a couple blocks unless you get real lucky and find a parking space on the street.
And
but we're hoping we're going to have a lot of the old racers from the Knoxville area.
If you haven't been to downtown Knoxville in a while, they also have what they call, I think, is it the Market Square? It's right down below the museum. And it's just it's a walking area that used to be a street, and now they have shops and nice little restaurants, quick little delis and things like this. They're really a great thing, just a beautiful saving of that, and some beautiful old theaters right along that area.
Boy, don't we wish we had our old Princess up and running as a movie theater?
Yes,
Wouldn't that be great?
Have those big signs flashing. Franklin, Tennessee has one of those too.
We have to say thanks to the folks that came out Thursday night, even in that big storm, to watch It's a Dirt Track Live down at the Museum Center. We had a small but enthusiastic crowd that we had to move indoors, obviously. And it was kind of hard to hear the video those first few minutes because it was raining so hard. But you'll have the opportunity tomorrow to see it again at in Knoxville. And then we're showing Caney Creek next Saturday, Ron, at 1 o'clock, which means we got to leave here like we're on fire and get up to Athens to the Living Heritage Museum for a showing of the history of Caney Creek. We haven't shown that one in a while, and there's still folks that want to see it, so that's a good opportunity to see it. And we'll be Tuesday night down with the McDonald Black Fox Ruetan Club showing Caney Creek during their regular meeting, too, for folks that are involved in that.
Okay. Arnold, I know a lot of people send out and says, wonder if I live in an old house, or I don't know how. I mean, what are some of the there's no perfect way to find out how old your house is unless you get lucky with someone wrote it down in their Bible or got pictures and things. But what steps could they take to start finding out about where that property was before it was theirs? And
well, one of the most first steps is actually go to the assessor's office in any county and look at what their record says, because they, all the people who gather the information, one of the things you try to gather is the original construction date. At least get a year. You may not have the exact day the house was finished, but you should have a pretty good idea of what year.
So, Arnold, if it was a piece of property with no house on it, let's say in 1930, the next year the assessor would have to come out and look at that property and go, now there's improvements on it, and they would make a notation somewhere.
In the old assessment records, if you actually looked at them, it was very generic. You might be doing good in those original old records to find that information out. As time went on, those records improved. And in the early 1960s, when they went to a more standardized listing process, that's when you start actually seeing years printed out there that this was the year this property was built. And a lot of that comes from those old records. But if you look through the old tax records, you can obviously say 1 year that this property was 40 acres, bounded on the north, bounded on the east, bounded on the south, and bounded on the west of vacant land. And then the next year, if it says the same thing but with a house, then, you've got a starting point right
now.
there.
When they redid the computer system a couple of years ago, it kind of went to just listing a house as being prior to 1900.
Well, the original computer system would only allow you to go back to 1900.
Oh, okay.
In 1971, 72, the original CAMA system that we started using would only allow you to go back to 1900. At that time, they said, we don't need to know if it's older than that because that really has nothing to do with market value today. That's just too old. Anything that old is either dilapidated beyond use or it's a lot newer, a lot better condition than that. So they really didn't look towards putting that information in as accurately. They just said if it's prior to 1900, that's the limit the computer system would go back on. The newer systems today that we're using actually let you go back and put in the actual year build if you know them. And as we have found out those years, we do go back and put them in.
Good for you. And Doug Elrod.
Yes.
Took a vested interest in this at some point in time. I don't know when that was, and that's the late Doug Elrod.
Yeah.
I know that I found at the History Branch file folders full of pictures of the house, the address, everything. Where would that have come from? Of all the older houses in Bradley County.
That probably has come from various individuals. I know that we are looking at some point in the future, instituting a photography process to take pictures of every house in Bradley County, to go along with our records. Of course, that won't be historical for quite a few years now, but those records will start coming into place. A lot of times what you'll see in information like this.
What is that, Arnold? It says www.tax...
realestate.com.
TennesseeRealEstate.com, and he had noted the houses that he knew that were older than 1900. Right. It doesn't have an exact date on it, but bless his heart, did he save me a lot of time looking for stuff. And then I was able to get, an assessment roll too. But on this assessment roll, it says there's 223 houses in Bradley County with the actual year built 1900 and prior to that. So and I'm sure that misses a lot of them, but still, if you have 223 identified, that's a whole lot more than what's on McCoy Street.
Yeah, that is a whole lot more.
Now,
You're talking about lots of just farmhouses, little houses just off the back roads. Mm-hmm. Now, when we say that there's built 1900, that's the best estimate. It could be 1890, it could be 1910, but we know that that house was probably there prior to that period of time. Mm-hmm. There are something like 7 or 8 homes now that I have actually identified actual year built and plugged them into the system, where people have told me information of when the actual structure of that house was started. And that's what I'm trying to determine on an actual year built. Mm-hmm. So if somebody out there actually knows an actual year built and their house was built before 1900, let me know. I'll put it on the system so at least we'll have a record of it.
What even if it was 1911? And
anything.
They can call you or call down to the assessor's office and tell somebody the exact address of the property and tell them that date, and you or somebody will put it on the records maybe. Yeah.
The house that I grew up in 2 houses, one in East Cleveland up until about 1970. Then we moved over next to Arnold School into a house that my grandmother had owned. I didn't look at the house on Poplar Street the other day to see exactly what year it had on the system. I think it's in the 30s. But the house on Mellon Avenue has the year built of 1926. Oh. And in conversations with a former neighbor, a man by the name of Bill Blevins, and students of George R. Stewart back in the day, we remember Mildred Blevins, his wife, who was a 3rd grade teacher over there for many years, actually grew up on Centenary.
Centenary. There you go.
And remembers when every house on that little short street of Mellon Avenue was built.
That's great.
And I know which house was the first house to build. I know which house was the last house that was built through conversations with him. And the year built on our house on Mellon Avenue was accurate to the right year.
And how, now tell me again how he knew that?
He actually grew up on Centenary.
And
remembered when every house on that little street had been built.
That's wonderful.
So. Well, we talk about that every week, is saying you got to talk to these older folks, and you surprised what information you'll find is when houses were built. I know the little house I grew up in is still standing. It's not standing where it was built. It was been moved, but I know that was built in 1952.
Or 51.
51, 52 area, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, and Ron's grandfather and uncle built houses all over Bradley County and all over Murray County and Whitfield County, Georgia. And we need to get his uncle out in the car and drive him by some of those because, now you're talking about houses that are, 60 and 70 years old that people would like to know an exact date on them.
Well, you take like an instance where this is in Polk County in Turtletown. My father, of course, grew up in Ducktown. My grandfather was a miner. They lived mostly in Buzzard's Roost community up there.
You're son of a Buzzard Roost resident, okay.
And, of course, today the house that Dad was actually born in is gone. It was torn down to make room for the Piggly Wiggly. I remember exactly, it's the 3rd house back on the lower side. So I know exactly where the house was. I remember seeing the house as a kid and Dad pointing it out. It's gone today. But there was a period of time in around 1938 or so that my grandfather decided he wanted to move to the country. So he moved the family to a house that he built in 1938 in Turtletown. Now, the house is still standing. There's a family that lives there and everything. Last I was by it, looked fairly decent shape. But how many people really know who built that house and when, besides myself at this particular time? And of course, there's a few other people I've told that live up in that area, so they know. But other than that, who would actually know? So if anybody knows, pass it on.
Pass it on. Don't keep it to
Well,
yourself.
Let's talk about a house here that I'm going to call it the Reeder House. Start, and it's a pre-Civil War home, still standing today, and we have pictures of those early days, not pre-Civil War, but early.
Pre-remodeling in the 40s, they
right.
had electricity.
And
yes.
people pass it all the time and don't realize what it is. Deb, can you tell a little bit about the Reeder House?
Of course, that's the Jackson Lake
Yeah.
house. The Reeders, we think, built it. It could have possibly belonged to someone prior to the removal. I don't know that. But I know that it was standing during the Civil War. The house is actually standing there that Mrs. Jackson still lives in was pre-Civil War. There's entries in Myra Inman, bless her heart's diary. She saved so much history for us, just talking about her friends and neighbors. She talks about at some point in time when the town was kind of under siege, people that were on both sides went there and hid in the basement, together. And Mrs. Hardwick talks about being out. She was out next to Fletcher, where Fletcher Park is now, and she wrote in her diary about some shooting and carrying on that went on at the Reeder place. And Mr. Reeder, I believe, was with the milling company. And then later it was owned by the Sykes family that was in with the milling company. And then Mr. Jackson, as a young barefooted boy in overalls, walked by there a million times during his youth, and he'd say, I'm going to live in that house someday. And he did. By George, he bought it and he did.
Now,
but it was originally red brick.
Right.
Obviously had no source of light in the beginning. Then they went to some of those older systems with the powder and all that that had burning lights. And then they had gas lights that are in the picture that we posted on Facebook this morning, and that was taken right before it was painted white.
Now, a lot of those old red brick buildings got painted white. Why? Because
Well,
that red brick was beautiful.
Well, they pulled that red brick, of course, out of the Candies Creek that was right there. And I don't know if it was the brick making process that wasn't quite what it needed to be at that point in time, or if the red clay wasn't quite what it needed to be and needed something else mixed to it. But it turned out to be very porous, which would let water seep into the house, which caused mold. And that was the demise of many an old house here in Bradley County, was the mold. And so they found that they could seal those houses, and that's what someone did prior to the time that Mr. Jackson bought the house. And when Mrs. Jackson moved in, she kind of wanted that old white paint, and she wanted the red brick back, and there was no removing it then because the porous brick had absorbed all that white paint, and so they just painted it back white. But
It's a beautiful house now.
it is. Another example of a beautiful house, and thank goodness that a young man is restoring it, is the Mee Mansion out in Chattata Valley.
Oh, that's
Chattata Valley, however you say that word correctly.
When I grow up, I'm going to live in that house.
when Ron wins the lottery, and you guys can go, I can't remember the website, but I think if you'll Google the Mee House in Bradley County, Tennessee, it comes up. But Jack Sanders' son, who worked for a few years, remodeling houses down in Savannah, Georgia. The reason I can't talk is there's a man with no shirt cleaning the carpet outside the building, and I got distracted. But anyway.
I think that's a shirt, Debbie. It's just skin color.
No, I think you need
Well,
your
let's don't
eyes
argue about
examined.
it. Well, I do need my eyes examined.
Oh, he made me look again.
Yeah.
But anyway, he remodeled houses for a number of years in Savannah, which tells you he knows a lot about restoring houses to their initial glory. And they've been in the process for probably 18 months or longer now, restoring the house up on the Shaded Valley, the Captain Mee's house, which I think, I haven't got to go under that house, but I'm thinking that when we see underneath that house, it's going to be a pre-removal house. And I just need to figure out what Indian name belongs to it.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous house. They just,
I think it's going to end up being the Taylor family, but that's just my guess from something from a long time ago. What you got there?
We just talking about that house. I just planted out a few of the cards with the information on the ones that we do know before 1900, and that's one of them I printed out. We're carrying a year on that of 1850.
Yeah. I'm thinking we might beat that by a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
that's very possible, but
it's got all the characteristics. Now, I have never studied architecture, but I make sure I put people in my car that know a lot about stuff, and I drive them around and show them things.
Yeah.
And that's been some of the nice things about being involved with the East Tennessee historical preservation people, and that they'll take you places, and during casual conversations, I learn a whole lot about how to look at a house differently.
Yeah. One thing, Ron was asking how to tell it. Of course, first thing you do is check historical records, try to find out. But there's other things you do. Look at the structure. Look at how it's put together. And you get into taking out a wall to do something, or you uncover a wall to do something.
Someone mentioned that on the website here just
in
a
the
few
house
minutes ago.
that I was talking about that I lived in that's built in 1926. We completely remodeled that house over the time that we lived there. And there's a period of time where I had 2 entire rooms stripped down to the studs. And I was actually moved the door from one location where somebody had moved it back to its original location. Once I opened up the wall, I said, well, now wait a minute, the door used to be over here. So I moved the door back to the original location because it worked better there, actually. And one of the things I got into was I needed the 2x4 to fix one of the little studs and everything. Well, the 1926 era 2x4s are a fraction larger than today's 2x4s. So that, that's something.
You would think a 2x4 would be a 2x4.
No, the dress lumber today is actually smaller than the 2x4s of 1926.
See, I just learned something else.
So it's little things like that when you get into it that start giving you telltales of how old a house might be. In the early days, a 2x4 was 2 inches by 4 inches. Today, it's like 2 5/8 by 3 5/8 or something like that. I think that's the correct dimension.
1 5/8, but yeah.
But
probably.
the 2x4 today is not a full 2x4 inches like that. And the other thing I got into is those studs had been there for so long and had dried out so well and never gotten wet. I actually had to take a drill and drill pilot holes to drive nails into them to put them back together.
They tough.
And you may find stuff in the walls that gives it away. They used
Exactly.
a lot of newspapers.
Newspapers used for insulation.
They sure were.
Even if you have a house that has wired electricity from that era, those original electrical wires run on glass insulators inside the house. So there's another telltale. You're talking about early electricity. It's not the coax cable that we're used to pulling through all the houses today. It's actually separate lines run on glass insulators in a lot of cases.
That's the things that causes so much expense when you start remodeling correctly, and especially if you want to actually use the building for an office or a home, and you need to wire it for cable and all that. You have to do it right, or you lose the house, like we lost that wonderful house in Georgetown a few months ago. But if we let's go for a ride here. Let's go down Dalton Pike. Well, when you're going down Dalton Pike, of course, there when you pass the school, right there on the left is an old white farm building that's been in the Campbell family for a number of years. I believe it belonged to Mr. Westenberg, which it was Ellen Ann Campbell's dad that was a judge here. That farmhouse belonged to him. And so we're looking at a house from the late 1880s or so, 1870s probably. But then you go on down, and on the right you would see the Martin house, which is a white vinyl house with a red tin roof. And I had read where John Martin's house was still standing, and I stood at the fence to the Hoskins place and looked at that brick building, and I thought, well, that's not from the 1800s. I could just tell it was a nice house. It's a beautiful old house, and it's still there. But it's from the late 1940s. But then I read in the articles where they had moved the Martin house.
Yeah.
So I was going, okay, so many feet, this way and that way. And I looked, well, there was the white house with the red roof. And The nice little folks that lived there thought they were living in an early 1900s house until I showed up on their doorstep.
Yeah.
And they said, well, the guy that assessed the property said that he went up in the rafters and came down and said, this house is much older than you think it is.
Yeah.
And so once we got the, and you were talking about when you have to move, when you have to remodel, well, one edge of the house was sinking low and they took up the boards. And I said, if you ever take up these boards and you have logs that look like, and I told them what the old logs would look like, you know, that were the bottom rafters. And of course, that's why they could move it too.
Mm-hmm.
It was put together like a big Lincoln log house, and you just stuck. Yeah, they could just move them. And but anyway, they called me one day in the middle of some big rainstorm and said, Miss Moore, it looks just like you said it would look. And here I go in my little Volkswagen down Dalton Pike, barely hitting the road every now and then because it was raining so hard. But I took pictures, and that was the one thing that really put it over the top with the National Park Service is when they saw those huge logs under there that were holding that structure together, and they had no problem at all saying early, 1830s at the latest.
You had archaeologists come in and look at it.
I did.
And then you had people from the Cherokee.
I called and said, now we're going to turn around in your driveway, but please don't feel like you have to open the house up. I'm just going to come by. Well, when we turned in the driveway, the historian for the Eastern Band of the Cherokees was opening the car door and getting out while the car was still driving. He was so excited when he saw the house because he recognized it as being a Cherokee type house. A lot of times they had a front porch that had a door that led out to a little skinny porch.
Yeah.
That one has that. And it's just the way you just know them when you see them. The overhang is not very far from the roof. And they had guttering systems, you know, back in the 1800s. They figured out guttering. I mean,
Now, Judge Martin would have been a very wealthy Cherokee, right?
Yes, he was run out of Georgia. We think that he probably owned that big plantation prior to the time that he moved here. He had more than one wife. We kind of think that maybe one wife lived here and the other wife lived in Murray County. And that's a good thing to keep your wives a distance apart. We think after they moved here, one wife lived up at the Truett Place, which would be close to the old Waterville School, and the other one lived in Dalton Pike in that White House. But the National Park Service has put it as a historic place on the National Trail of Tears, because an incident happened there and someone wrote it all down. Matter of fact, it was John Ross that wrote it all down.
Judge Martin, for real quick, a history lesson, was a judge for the Cherokee Nation, and also he was the national treasurer for the Cherokee Nation, right? And so what happened in that house, which may have been just across the street where the Hambright house is, that beautiful Hambright house is on the left over there, that farm.
That's actually the Hoskin house.
Hoskin house,
but Hambrights are the white folks that bought that plantation and came in here. So a lot of people call it the Hambright farm.
But the troops came from Fort Cass in Charleston and surrounded that house and seized all the financial records of the Cherokee Indians right here in Bradley County. And basically, they've never found those records. Is that true?
I'm sorry. Somebody's laughing because I keep nodding at you on the camera.
Deb don't pay attention to me what it is. I'm used to that.
It is. It's true.
So, but
all of their financial records. Judge Martin, all the rich folks went ahead and moved their families out west themselves. They took their stock, they took their slaves, they took their many wives, they took everybody, and they just went out west. Well, he had everybody come together, and they were going to go over all the financial records before he left the country, or left the Cherokee country. And that's when they seized the records, took all the men that were in the house to Charleston and held them until they figured out they didn't know any more than what was in the records, but they never got the records back.
Yeah.
Yesterday, ironically, yesterday, of course, being D-Day, also June 6th was the 1838, the first involuntary Cherokees left Ross's Landing. So yesterday was a big day for America and several things prior to World War II and then during World War II also. Folks, you're listening to Whoop FM, Old Town Cleveland. You can tune in at 99.9 or you can go to www.whoopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553 if you have a question about a house, or if you think you know of an older house
I'd love to
and your family, and if you have pictures, we really would like to talk to you. We'd like for you to call in. It doesn't have to be a famous house. Arnold talked about these little farmhouses have a lot of history. Family history is as important as anything out there. So please call us with your questions, and we'd love to hear your stories even more. 614-5553, and we'll be here till noon today.
I got a note that says the hot dogs are cooking at Pleasant Grove United Methodist Church. Go down and see them. They're a half a mile behind the Cleveland Speedway.
What kind of condiments do they have?
I don't know.
You have to talk with
I've
Cher.
never-
You're going to have to talk to Cher about that.
I have
I'm sure
never
she's got
seen
that
you
lined
turn
up.
down a hot dog, Ron.
Well, just different
Speaking
condiments.
of great things to eat, Barbecue Done Right's up at the Jetport today, and you can go up there and drive a Porsche for, I believe the tickets are $125. Oh, excuse me. Ferrari.
Big difference between a Ferrari
I
and
don't
Porsche.
know. One of those fast little cars that I've never driven. But just for $125, they let you go, and you get a video of your drive and get pictures taken. But
You get to
you
drive
can
or you
go-
get to ride?
you get to drive, I understand.
So how fast do I get to drive?
However fast you need to go, I guess.
I don't need to go that fast.
But anyway, Anthony's up there feeding the crowd today, and you could go up there and watch other folks drive the little fast cars and get you a sandwich from Anthony.
Oh, there's another good deal. I'm going to have to get me a barbecue and a hot dog today.
There you go.
There you go. So, older buildings here,
Well, I was going down Dalton Pike.
yeah, well, okay, excuse me. Go ahead.
Get back in the car, Ron. I'm driving.
I'm back. All right.
But as you go down Dalton Pike,
Yeah.
then on the left, as you get to the Flint Springs Road, you have Oscar Foster's house, and his wife is out of the Reimer family, and the Reimer family has
Yeah.
owned that for generations.
Yes.
Generations and generations. And before that, the Joneses built it. And I believe somehow they're related to the Hambright family, too. Ben Hambright originally owned that property, I believe. But anyway, that's an 1870s house. Had a big spring there. Unfortunately, all the outbuildings around the house are no longer original, but that is an 1870s, 1880s sort of house. Then you have Flint Springs Church, which was established in the 1830s, and that building is from the 1880s, I believe. A beautiful example of an old country church. I know that the Hannah boys help out there with the cemetery and keep the church up, and it's beautiful. Then you have the Flint Springs Church. It's from the 1920s. The house on the other side of the springs was the location of the Red Clay Mission that was there pre-removal times, and I would kind of guesstimate that some of that foundation may be from that
Very
original.
possible.
Very possible. I know where some of the floors are from that mission building. Some of the floors were taken out and put in the McCoy house, which is, if you circle around on Red Hill Valley Road, you'll pass an old mill, and then the very next house on the right was the McCoy house. Mr. and Mrs. McCoy got married in the 1930s, I believe. They lived in another house in that community, moved to that house in the 1940s and remodeled it and used some of the old mission floors. I understand the family, after Mrs. McCoy, well into her 100s, passed away, and they pulled up layers of linoleum and carpet and all that stuff that people put down in houses. There was those beautiful wooden floors. You go on down the road and you find the Conley house that's pre-Civil War, and you'll be able to recognize it because it's got the big white columns on the front of it. And Oscar Renner ran that in the 1950s as a dairy, and you'll see a lot of his 1950 dairy barns still there. And
Good call here. Okay, go ahead, caller.
Hello, Ron.
Hey, Miss Ella, how are you?
Oh, I'm okay.
So what you up to? I thought you was going to California.
I am in California. I'm on the city bus.
she's on the city bus.
On the city bus in California.
Oh, you got to see my grandbaby. She is so beautiful.
Looks just like you, doesn't it?
It-
The baby look just like you?
no, she got black curly hair. She is so pretty, but she won't let me touch her.
Yeah, she'll get used to you.
Yeah. Hey, you know what, Ron?
What?
You know those guys that was following me down in Tennessee?
Yeah.
Guess what?
They followed you to California?
They sure have. I seen Mark at the bus station. He was trying to deny that he was Mark. I ain't that stupid, Ron. So I showed him a picture on my phone. I said, "That's you."
Oh. That Mark Grissom, you got to watch him.
But you know what else? You know what else he's done? All
What?
of them, every one of them's followed me up here, and it's Mark's fault. I know it is. They have got the Tennessee tags off their cars and put California license on it. Now you know they ain't bought them tags.
They stole them, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. I mean, don't Mark think I know his cars?
Oh.
I don't know what to do. I even called the highway patrol.
I would.
They wouldn't even check the cars. I mean, I bet 25 cars just followed me. I need a BB gun.
We need a stronger signal so they notice you're
Well,
talking about them.
I'm going to check. Next time Mark's not on the radio, we'll know where he went.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh-huh. So,
I would like to tell his funeral home about it, but I don't want to bother him. I care too much for him.
all right, Miss.
Problem.
Well, Miss Ellie, you have a fun time out there in California.
Oh, I'm going to go to Price is Right as soon as I get a ticket going.
All right.
See what day they're going to be on.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, we miss you.
Thank you, Miss Ella. Have a good day, baby. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Woo. Wee doggies.
Next.
Okay. Well, I was at Oscar Renner's house, but anyway, the Conleys bought that several years ago, and they're maintaining it quite well. And then as you come on down, Red Hill Valley Road, for those of you who don't know, it's a big loop. So when you get on it, you just leave Dalton Pike and get back on Dalton Pike, so you can't get lost too bad. But anyway, there's a house from 1912 there on Red Hill Valley Road too.
Is that across from the church?
No, that one's much older than that.
Oh, okay. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Wolf FM. Y'all keeping Cleveland straight out there?
No.
We're not keeping Miss Ella straight.
You letting them run wild, ain't you?
We're trying our best.
Oh, man. Just keep a tight reins on them and just giddy up and ride.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, this is Country Boy Produce down here on South Lee Highway at the flea market today.
Uh-huh.
I've got flats of strawberries. I'm going to let them go for $12 a flat and tomatoes $3 a cup.
Sounding good.
Yeah, if you know what the market is on them, they're pretty high, but I've got a special on them. Tomatoes is right now at the market for like $21 or $25 a case.
Wow.
But, I've got a few cases of left tomatoes, and I've got a lot of strawberries, but I'm going to let them go for $12. Y'all need to come on down here and make a little Whoop FM strawberry shortcake.
Oh.
I'm sure Matador and the Fro Daddy would dig into it if you left it there and forgot about it. You know that.
Well, I tell you, if you left it on Saturday, it wouldn't get to Monday. I'd take care of it.
You'd take care of that.
Yes, sir.
You know, my pastor makes banana pudding, man, after church, and he says, let's dig in. I go straight to the banana pudding.
It's nanner pudding.
That sounds like a plan to me.
That's right.
It is.
I grew up with 7 or 8 big cousins. And I was the youngest. I'm bigger than them now, but they used to get all the banana pudding.
Oh, yeah. It
So-
only took Mama one time to stick her head out the door and say, hey, supper's ready, buddy. Hey, she didn't have to holler twice. You know what I mean?
All right. Now, you're at the flea market on South Lee Highway today.
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you.
Good luck. That's
Now
good
that-
dealing on those strawberries now.
The house you're talking about, Ron, is the Blackburn house across from Red Hill United Methodist Church, and I took the state fellow there too.
Yeah.
The reservationist before he left us and went to a place called New York. But anyway, he advised me that there's a like an 1880s house there. It's a 2-story house, has beautiful woodwork in it. But there's one little room off to the side by itself, and he said this is the old cabin. So that we just really don't know how old that is, but it is much older than the 1880s part of the house. And Mitch Cochran and his wife have beautifully preserved that house. The little church was first established as a brush arbor. Yep. And then I think we found a notation, or I believe Debbie Riggs found a notation for me that building was built in 1880s. But the church has been there since before the removal.
Go ahead, caller. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning. I'd like to say a couple of things about how you can identify the age of these houses, and then I'd like to ask you a question too.
Okay, go right. Who are we talking to?
It's Pat Guerin.
Oh, hey, Pat. Go ahead.
I got interested in old tools and the early settlement of Bradley County, and the first sawmills were sash saws when they was first opened up the Indian Territory here. And they would leave a mark. The saw would come straight down like a pit saw would. And then instead of having a circular mark in the side of the wood where it's cut, the saw marks would be straight up and down.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That predates that thing to back in the early 1850s or earlier. Wood screws before 1850 were flat on the end. Where they screwed down into the wood, they were just flat. They didn't have a sharp point to them. And you can identify old screws by that shape of them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then another thing that you run into a lot around here is that a lot of the logs were hewn out with broad axes or foot axe. You know, a broad axe will make a kind of a sweeping cut down the side of it, and it'll show its telltale marks. It'd be kind of like a long sweeping edge. Mm-hmm. And a foot axe will make kind of a flat scoop into the side of the wood. And that identifies that as early. And the nails, they was making cut nails back in the 1850s, but Pioneer, East Tennessee, didn't see very many cut nails there. And these old structures, where a lot of them were just pegged together. Mm-hmm. Very few cut nails were used. You see handmade nails. They show a distinction. That dates it. Now, I'd like to ask you a question. What was the oldest house found in Bradley County so far?
Well, of course, the Hare Conrad house, the little log cabin on Blythe Wood, is supposed to be from the early 1800s, like 1802 or something. And I have no problem with them saying that. I really think that house has been moved, because if I was living on that farm in that cabin, that's not where I would have put that cabin. I'd put it a little closer to the water. There's not any water up on top of that hill. But at any rate, it was saved, and so I'm happy about that. Of course, the John Martin house, we think's 1830 or earlier. Bob Irwin's house up on Charleston, where Wilson Farm Road runs into, help me with the name of the road, guys.
Walker Valley.
No, it's not Walker Valley Road, but we'll think of it here in a second.
Gosh, in my mind.
We're all sitting here staring at each other. But anyway, you turn off of North Lee Highway on Wilson Farm Road, and it's right there on the corner, and it's a white house that lost its beautiful old tree. We can date that house back to 1826. That's some of the ones that I think are the earlier houses. Do you have any in mind?
Me?
Yes.
The ones in my area, the real old ones, other than the Ross farm, it has some that was built back in mid-1830s.
Yeah, now they've torn down the house there. You're talking about the Ross farm up on Highway 60.
Much later date there. It was maybe turn of the century.
Okay.
The outbuildings.
Yeah, I agree with you.
They date back to mid-1830s, 34, 35.
I agree with you.
And then there's one house back down just south of the McPherson Bridge Road that was Bob McPherson's house. It dates around 1880. It's one of those houses that's been covered with asbestos shingles and now aluminum sided.
Well, that's okay. It protects the logs is all I can say. But I think that there's a bunch of houses here that were built in the late 1880s.
There's some right behind the courthouse that just torn down recently, weren't they?
Now, one of the Mayfield houses that's on the street that runs maybe no, it's not Harl Avenue. It's the street that runs behind Broad Street, United Methodist Church. Worth Street. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, there's one.
On down close to 8th Street there. It's the Mayfield house, and the family says it's from the 1820s, and I have no problem with that either. I've been on that tour, and the documentation looked really good.
I tell you, to make a suggestion, you should talk to some brick masons because they can identify the style of these chimneys and put a date on those houses.
That's right, Pat. You're absolutely right about that. If you see that, I call it a fluted roof. If it goes straight up and then it goes out at some wild angle and back in, that's what I call a fluted roof, and I recognize those as being very old chimneys. Now, unfortunately, they were very easy to knock off too during the windstorms and all that kind of stuff, and they typically get replaced by a more modern looking chimney. Mr. Parks here in town, that unfortunately his house burned in the last couple of years down on the east end of Central Avenue. He was an African American man that made a whole lot of bricks, and they're in a whole lot of buildings in Bradley County, along with Mr. Taylor was also a brick mason. He built the brick structure for Hardwick Woolen Mills and Arnold School.
All right, I'll let you go.
Pat, thank you so much. You brought out some great points, and I appreciate your call today.
Okay, thank
Good talking to you. He said something about the pegs in the building. I got so excited. I had the opportunity to go out on Bates Pike, out past Taylor School, over next to Brandon Road. The Fox Barn is standing there, and it was built by George Fox. George Fox died in 1860, and we know that he built that cantilever barn, and that so it has to be obviously from the 1850s or earlier. And I had the opportunity, someone in the family took me up in the attic of that building, and it's completely put together with pegs.
Yeah.
And just to see the artist work there, that you think, my gosh, how did they do this? And all these years later, it's still standing here. And all of the hardware is horseshoes that have been turned into hinges, and all of the gizmos and gadgets on the doors that lock the doors are all made from a blacksmith shop. So I would venture to say somebody in that family was a blacksmith. But I really, it's a work of art to see a good cantilever barn.
It's amazing what they did. When you look at what they had to work with, the tools.
Those forklifts.
There's people today can't do that kind of work with all the modern equipment.
Yeah, no. And for a cantilever barn to still be maintaining itself, and I noticed that they had put some metal rods up under the ends of it, but my goodness, it needed a little help, and that's quite all right.
I need a little myself here. On down Dalton Pike, the Lusk home, or where Charlie Hanna lives.
Yes, Charlie Hanna's home.
Yeah.
And they've maintained that well, too. Bless their hearts.
Now,
on
that
big
house
old
has
farm.
burned once and been built back. So
It burned during the Civil War when there was a confrontation there. Mr. Lusk, who had been a soldier of 1812, I believe, well, he was just sick and tired of them Confederates coming by and stealing his mules and his horses. And so they rode up, and before they could ever say, we're going to steal something, he shot one of them off the horse and killed them. The other ones rode away. But we know that later that night, they came back, and Mr. Lusk was hiding out in a barn on Red Hill Valley Road somewhere. And I haven't figured out which barn that is. I hope it's still standing, though, when I find it. And they burned the house to the ground. And Charlie Hanna, who has lived there for the last 30 or 40, lived there all of his life, I guess, he said that they were out doing some digging in the yards, replacing some septic lines, and his grandpa told him if he ever dug it up, he'd find the burnt wheat, because they had wheat all stored in the basement of the house and stuff. Sure enough, when they got to digging, they found big old handfuls of burnt wheat still down in the ground.
So the house there now is 1860, 70 then?
Well, they said, we'll show you, and I mean the minute the Civil War was over, they put that house back up. So it's from 1865.
What about
66.
the Stockburger house right across the street?
Stockburger
right down the
house belonged to the Boyds, and who were that house.
Arnold, she didn't know anything to talk about this morning.
That house is, if you guys are going south on Dalton Pike, when you get closer to the Georgia line, you'll pass the Lusk house, and then I think you get to the Stockburger house. And it's a kind of a railroad looking house, but I believe it's I haven't gone up and knocked on the door, But I believe that's going to be a log structure because all the buildings that used to stand around it that are now unfortunately gone were log structures. I believe that may be a pre-removal house or shortly after removal house. I think that they were there on that road and they controlled the traffic of those roads there and may very well had a toll road that went off.
It was a pike.
It was a pike. You had Dalton Pike. You had paid to be on it. It was built by the rich folks in town, just as Old Chattanooga Pike.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Old Chattanooga Pike, Old Alabama Road, if you go to Old Chattanooga Pike and Old Alabama Road, at the they're laughing at me because I won't quit talking. But there's an intersection there at Old Alabama Road and Old Chattanooga Pike, and there's a beautiful house there that belongs to the Johnston family, who have kept it in pristine condition. I think that that's also a pre-removal house.
Yeah.
Belonged to William Williams. He was married to a Cherokee lady. She was a relative of Hare Conrad, and they lived there, and they sold the property to the Tucker family. That's the widow Tucker's house. When they talk about in the Civil War the widow Tucker's house, that's the widow Tucker's house.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm through talking now. Somebody else talk for a minute.
Ask Arnold a question. Arnold, you've worked for the assessor's department either here or in the state for how long now?
34 years.
Right. So in Bradley County, you've probably seen every piece of property in Bradley County. Is that true?
I would not say that it's absolutely true, but I'd say it's most likely possible.
It's very likely.
Now,
there's not very many places in the county I've not been at one time or another.
Now, their department, they do go out and measure your property and what size your house is, and then they apply that to a formula that the county tax rate is set by the county commission, and then they apply what they measure, and that's how you get your taxes and everything. Right. So if you build more houses and add on to your house, your taxes will go up. It's just that.
If you take something off, it'll go down. That's the way it works. They've
got satellites now, and they spy on you constantly when you build that building.
Now, don't go there. We don't use satellite photography yet. Notice I said yet.
Arnold, I mean, what's some of the old farms and things that you run in being, actually – you get to go out and measure and see a lot of this stuff. What do you see out in the county?
It's interesting because you'll walk out and look at an old barn. And like what you're talking about, the cantilever barn that's having posts under it. We have so many records. It still goes back to that 1900, but there's a lot of times I look at that barn and I said, that was in the 1800s, without a doubt.
And where the people came from.
Yeah.
It often reflects in their outbuildings how they're shaped and stuff, and cantilever barns were very uncommon here, but very common in Smoky Mountains because there was a set of people up there that built barns, and that's how they built them.
And one of the things you've got to remember that a lot of the settlers that came here in Bradley County originally came from the Greene County, Cocke County, Sevier County, mountainous areas. The Ornbys is a big group that came from Sevier County. My own family, the McNabb side, on my mom's side, they came from Washington and Greene counties, Cocke County. So, I mean, you have a large migration.
Lawson's, Ogles.
The Ogles, they're all.
Shields.
The
Shieldses came from up there, too.
They came from up there, but I don't think they
in the Smokies.
Not Sevier County. They may have came from Washington or Greene or somewhere like that. I haven't. And you look at that, and you see that architecture from those areas that transcends from one place to the other. It's it's fun. You go out there and you see these old houses, and you say, talk to the people, and they'll tell you the story. Well, my great-grandfather built this house. They may not know the year, but they know that great-grandfather built
and
this
they
house.
have a good idea. Well, the house across the street from the Fox barn, the old chimney's still standing there. The house unfortunately burned, but the family, and Dr. Fox, what was he, an orthodontist of some kind?
I don't tell your stories.
He was a dental surgeon. He did surgery on your head.
On your head?
Ron's not with me today. But anyway, he was a dental surgeon of some type down in Chattanooga, and he always talked about he'd like to go out to his farm and drive his bulldozer. That's what he did for fun and relaxation. Well, that's his farm, and it's been in that family since the 1850s or something. And they're buried in that same community over on another road called In Swan Cemetery. And it was kind of fascinating to me that Mr. Fox, who was so talented and could build such things, well, then his tombstone is just some little hand-carved tombstone, but thank goodness somebody put it there. Son was a Union soldier, I believe, and he's buried in that little cemetery, too.
You know,
Go ahead.
my own great-grandmother lived down on Cahulla Creek off Hawkins Hollow Road. You've been down in that area.
Oh, yeah, I've been down in there.
And
I didn't
while
know that.
the
McNabb?
house is the McNabb,
McNabbs.
that's part of the original McNabb farms. There was actually some of the Ogles property over there has transferred from the McNabbs to the Ogles over time. So, and the Walkers are interrelated and all that.
Now, did one of the twins or both of the twins get snake bit? There was a set of Walker twins.
I think just one of them.
One of them got snake bit and died there at Cahulla Creek.
We got a call here. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Ron,
Yeah.
this is Kenneth Roark. Y'all talking about old houses. I thought I'd call in and run a couple by,
Go ahead, Kenneth.
Carter House in McDonald and then the Roark House. Those two houses at least 100 years old.
What was the first one?
The Trotter House on Grove Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at least 100 years old. And then our home house, the Roarks, it's at least 100 years old. Because my parents would have been 101 this year. They're 15 years old when they moved here. So.
Now, tell me where the Trotter House is.
Okay, Trotter House, if you come down South Lee Highway from Cleveland, you come past Lee Cemetery, and Bancroft Road will be on the right. And you go up Bancroft Road about 1 3/4 miles, and it's right on the right there. And it's the old-timey T-shaped house like all the real old houses used to be. The front will be square, and then they'll have a T off the back where the kitchen and all that stuff would be.
Okay. Well, Kenneth, I want you to make me a list of houses you think I need to see, and I'll get with you and come down, and you and Doyle can show me around the neighborhood and show me some of the older houses and barns down in there.
Do you happen to have any pictures of your dad around that?
We got some old pictures of our house before it was remodeled, but I don't think I got any of the Trotter House. But the Trotter House is still the same. It's not been changed anything. It just had some new siding stuff put on it.
Well, that's
Good.
great. Exactly the kind of stuff.
It's still got the old tin on it. Still got the old tin on it. They put on it.
I love it when the old tin roofs are still on them.
Yeah, but our house does not. But the Trotter House still has tin on it.
Wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you.
Start making a list, Kenneth. I'll be calling you.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Folks, we need to take a little break here and pay some bills, and we'll be back with you with the second hour of Old Town Cleveland. Be sure to go up to the Jetport today. I believe they're going to be up there until about 6 o'clock, and then the yard sale down at Pleasant Grove United Methodist Church will be going to 2 o'clock.
Barbecue on the north end, hot dogs on the south.
There you go. Can't go wrong.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
You need money overnight? Check into cash. Your time is tight. .com. Bank account's too low? Check into cash. So where do you go? .com. Do it online in a record time. It's the easy way to get money next day. Do a quick click from home at checkintocash.com. Just stay in the house. Check into cash and grab your mouse. .com. Get your money online. Check into cash right on time. .com. You can be sure it's secure from our bank straight to yours. Do a quick click from home at checkintocash.com. No time to get away. Check into cash. You gotta stay home.com. Hey, that's okay. Check into cash. You can do it alone.com. Any old time, do it online. Just stay in the house and grab your mouse. Do a quick click from home. Get your money overnight at the right website. Do a quick click from home. Go to checkingtocash.com.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
All of my friends that I loved yesterday have gone. They have gone home. Gone home. They have gone home. The songbirds are singing, the dell seem to say have gone. They have gone home. Gone. They have gone home. They've joined the heavenly fold. They're walking the streets of pure gold. They left one by one as the work here was done. Gone home. They have gone home. Gone home. They have gone home. Life here is lonely since they've gone before. Gone. They have gone home. Gone. They have gone home. The old weeping willow that stands by the door sadly sighs. They have gone home. Gone home. They have gone home. They've joined the heavenly fold. They're walking the streets of pure gold. They left one by one as the work here was done. Gone home. They have gone home. Gone. They have gone home. They've joined the heavenly fold. They're walking the streets of pure gold. They left one by one as their work here was done. Gone home. They have gone home. Gone home. They have gone home.
We play that song every week for all those friends and neighbors that have gone home, and particularly this week, after with D-Day being on Friday.
You know, we've got folks out there listening that either participated in D-Day, Ron, or they had family members, and we'd like to hear from them this morning, too.
And every day there is probably a World War II veteran dies in America, maybe even every hour.
They were there for a long time. It was 1,000 a day, but I think we're getting fewer.
We got a call here. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, Ron, you all talk about old houses?
Yes.
My mother's dad built their home on Euclid Avenue, but it's been torn down.
Yeah.
And another house has been put in place.
That's true of a lot of houses.
We found that's true of a lot of places, that people will tear down the house and use that old foundation and put a new house up. But sometimes if we know when one house on Euclid Avenue was built, it can help us date the rest of them, because a lot of those little factory houses were all built, in a few years.
Yeah, well, you know the one I'm talking about.
Yes.
My papa built that house.
Uh-huh.
And then when, I want to say in the early 70s, they tore it down and built another house.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All righty. Well, thanks a lot for sharing that with us.
You need to write all that information down and save it.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Arnold, speaking of all those houses over next to Chair Factory Lane, when do you think those went in? I saw the.
If you look at the ages on most of them, you're looking at mostly 10s, 20s, and 30s.
When the industrial age hit.
Yeah, you can go throughout East Cleveland and South Cleveland, a lot of those old communities like that around the manufacturing areas, and you're looking mostly post-1900, but you have a tremendous number of them in that 10s, 20s, 30s, early 40s era. You know, that 50-year
I know
period.
that Debbie Riggs had the plot for over in that area where they named them those Indian names all over there in Oldfield. And I can't remember the date. Maybe she'll pop it up here on the computer screen for us. But it seemed like it was probably the 1930s.
Chippewa and
Chippewa, Winnetonka,
and all those exotic names. Yeah. But those were houses that were built to support the chair factories and Magic Shelf, which was Dixie Foundry then, and all of those businesses there. People they left the farm where you couldn't make any money, and they would walk to work.
Well, all those there are several old houses down. Is it going to be Church? It goes right by the Cleveland Chair and goes on down that way and on down towards where the
Debbie's saying it was she thinks it's the 1930s when that particular subdivision was built.
What about going down South Ocoee Street? Just before you go across the bridge on the left, there's a big 2-story house there, and there used to be 2 of them there. I think one of them may be gone now. Do you have any idea what kind of ages those were?
I think those probably fall into those 1920s.
Yeah,
late teens, early 20s period of time.
Where were you? I'm sorry, I was reading.
Go down South Ocoee Street, and just before you go across the bridge.
Okay.
There used to be 2-story houses there. I know there's one of them still left.
There. I think that extension that runs, it used to go down Church Street. Mm-hmm. You would leave downtown Cleveland, and we were more routed down Church Street down, and you came and you had to go across the railroad tracks. Well, they built that bridge, and somebody out there listening knows better than I do, probably in the 1940s, something like that. So I'm thinking the houses down through that little strip of South Ocoee Street's probably from the mid-30s to the mid-40s.
Something else, when you look back on these older homes, particularly go back in the 1800s, the roads may not be where they are today. Those roads may be gone. Those roads may have been horse trails, and now their roads have been moved up. And when you had horses, the road was closer to water. And when you have roads,
you wanted to get away from the water.
Away from the water.
There's a house I'm curious about, Arnold. It's when you pass the intersection of Old Chattanooga Pike and Old Alabama Road. You're going down Old Alabama Road, and shortly after that intersection, you see kind of a blue-gray house, 2-story house sitting right there on the edge of the road. Are you getting that one in your brain? I don't.
Vaguely. I remember the house, but I was trying.
Down in that community, in Black Fox community, you have several older houses. The house right past Black Fox School is the stone house, but it has been rebuilt. They tore down the old farmhouse and put up a new farmhouse in 1996. And by the way, that beautiful house is for sale if anybody's interested. Then you went on down to where Varnell Road ends. Of course, you have the Varnell house and the Black Fox Farms there that's from the 1880s. Just above that, you've got the Gates house, and I haven't been able to put a date on yet, but I'm thinking it's early 1900s. It's got the little rock siding on it, and used to have the little rock road wall out next to the road, but I think it's gone now.
What about Mr. Easterly's farm?
Mr. Easterly's house, that farm was bought in 1917. And they tore down what Mr. Easterly, which you guys know that he was quite the historian, he was told by his aunt that it was a, quote, Cherokee cabin there. He called it an old hut, is what he referred to. And so his house is from 1917. I understand that. Jack and Laverne had bought that piece of property. They sold the farm to Bendabout.
Yeah.
And they bought back their house.
Yes.
And they're remodeling it, and it was always gorgeous anyway. So I'm sure it's going to be even more gorgeous when they get finished there. There is a mill race still in place
Yeah.
there, and an old building. And I used to go down there. Mr. Easterly would walk me along and tell me wonderful stories about that place. But across the road from the 1917 house, Jack and Laverne have moved a cabin from the Bendabout farm, a cabin that Jack was born in over 70 years ago. And they modernized it, but it's still in its time element. You know, they put air conditioning in it and, of course, electricity and all that. But there's no television. It's got modern conveniences, but when you walk in, you can still smell the 100 years worth of ham that people have cooked in it.
Yeah.
And they went back and stripped down the walls and found the oldest color of paint and painted it back. And it's a fabulously restored cabin. Now, let me stop here and remind folks that all these things that we're talking about are on private property, and please don't annoy these folks. You can drive by and look all you want. But most people don't like strangers like me coming up and knocking on the doors. So please don't do that.
And your book will have a driving tour, and it's not a stopping tour.
Yeah.
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 It'll be drive by and just to say.
Well, we're trying to figure out economical ways to do big loops where you see the most houses.
They're put
and
in quadrants, I believe.
I think that it's going to be really something. It's going to be a big project to preserve history in Bradley County, but Arnold and Ron and I can't do this alone. We got to have everybody tell me about their grandma's house, and it needs to be a house that's still standing.
You're listening to Old Town Cleveland, and we're talking about old homes and houses and barns of Bradley County. We'd like for you to call in and tell us about your family's old home, where it was built, when it was built. If you're, as Inez called a few minutes ago and said their granddad had built this house, so we need to know those type of things. And if you have old pictures of that original house, even with you as a child in front of it, it makes it even a better story. Deb, up on the screen right now, that's the Pierce house up on the north end of town. And,
yes.
And now that's a current picture, and you have an older picture of it. How old was that house again? I know it's 1800s, I think.
The late 1800s,
Right.
and it's still in great, fabulous shape.
It's blue now.
It's blue, and the fun thing was when I posted it on Facebook several months ago, someone that had actually lived in the house responded and was so excited to see their old house.
Near Beaver Dam Road, I believe. Yeah, let me talk about while I'm up on that.
But now, see, we know that that's not from the early 1800s, unless it has it would usually have a doorway at the top because the houses were so hot. People would come out and sleep on the porches, the little upstairs porches. Either the door's been covered over or it didn't exist. I think that this is a much later one. And something that my dad, who was a builder, taught me, too, was in these old houses. Oh, my gosh, at the ventilation you could get by opening the windows and stuff.
it's amazing.
We would suffocate now in our modern-day houses without the shade. They knew how to put the shade cover. They knew how to, inside the walls of these old buildings, there will be venting systems that go from downstairs to upstairs, and it's just an open vent. There's no... And the air just naturally pulls through it. I know the two houses over on Harl Avenue that are owned by Rick and Starnes, he was telling me that when he remodeled, he discovered that venting system in those two houses that he thinks is from the 1920s.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And the other thing is, we didn't build 8-foot ceilings.
Mm-mm.
You're looking at, in the 26 houses, you're looking at 9-foot ceilings. Before that, you're looking at 10, 12-foot ceilings.
And that
to
was
let
all
that
for
heat
Venice.
go on up.
Yeah, get the heat away.
And that's why they had the outdoor kitchens even prior to that, is that when Mama cooked biscuits in the morning, you heated up the house and you'd suffocate in there. So they had, when they did all their canning and their big major cooking was outdoors.
The biggest thing you can do to help save any old house on your property is to make sure it has some type of roof on it.
Keep the roof on those barns.
The roof is on it. The property will last a lot longer.
The roof is the secret.
Yes,
Keeping
it
it
is.
dry inside.
It always breaks my heart when I see roofing. And we've had some horrendous weather in this area that's torn up some of the roofs. And I've seen where people are just patching them up, and that's fine. Just keep them dry, keep them dry, keep them dry.
The North End Julian Chapel is an older church, probably where Bradley County actually met in that area.
Yeah, on that farm.
On that farm.
The church is what, from the 1870s, Arnold?
Yeah,
something like
Something like
that
that.
building is going to go in bad repair if we community don't get behind it and put a roof on it,
Yeah.
anything on it just to keep it dry.
You know, and we have roofing companies here that have prospered so much in the last few years, unfortunately, because there's been so much bad weather. But it would really be a nice gesture on their part. I think that I don't care what color you put on there.
Oh,
it just needs a roof on there. And
Roof
and some of those folks have offered to help me with projects that I've been doing. And
well, we just if you see an old building and you want to save it, the up in at Reliance. That old church, I can't remember.
it was a church and a school and a Masonic hall. It was
Yeah.
the everything building.
It's
is what
still
I call
standing, and it's a very old building. And
because the Webb family has kept
Right.
a roof on it.
Yeah. So keep the roof on those things, and get together with your community. Julian Chapel is one of those places probably needs to really a very old area, and like I say, Bradley County actually met in that area there and formed. That's when they elected their sheriff. It was actually up in
Well,
in that
you look
area.
at Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Charleston. It's the old white church with the rock wall that's got the cemetery there. Well, we think that was built. Well, we know it was built pre-Civil War because it was used for an Army hospital. And that history has been preserved by folks who cared enough to write things down. But the church left there 30 years ago or 25 years ago, moved out on the highway.
Yeah.
But they didn't abandon that old building, and it's a lot to keep it up. But it's on the National Registry, and it's got a Civil War sign out front, and the folks are keeping it
the
dry on the
horses
inside.
chewed the windowsills and all that stuff. But yeah, keeping it together and saving that history. If nothing else, you need to take. If you have an old building that's about to go, take some pictures, find out all you can about it, and at least preserve it in written and photographic history.
Yeah.
That's something. If the building's got to go, okay, it gets to a point where they're going to fall down. Take pictures of it. Find out who built it, who did that. Say now, if someone wants to come up to the tax assessor's office, I hope they don't have a rush Monday, and because Stanley may be taking a nap. I'm not sure, but after we get this call, tell them what they need to do to come see you. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
I've got one for you to talk about.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
The Wrought House over by what used to be Magic Chef.
We were going to talk about that, but I said I was going to wait for Doug to call me and ask me about it.
Well, we're going to talk. We'll talk about that a little bit today, but I'm going to get David May in here to talk about the house that he lives in on McCoy Street and the Roth House and some other houses that he's either rebuilt or has helped save in the community. So he probably can tell us a whole lot more about it.
Who built the Roth House real quick? Thomas
Callaway,
and he built a lot of the other big houses.
He was the builder of the day. He would build a nice fancy house, and he'd live in it 2 or 3 months, and he'd sell it. And he'd live in a house, and he'd sell it. And so we can contribute a lot of the houses, as I don't think he built them with his own hands, but he
was the contractor.
He was basically the contractor that lived in the house until he sold it.
We'll talk about it, Doug.
Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to say that I got to tour it with Fro Daddy's daddy back in about 1965. Mr. May lived in it.
Mm-hmm.
We were just riding around one day in a convertible. He said, "Let's check this out." And he pulled up, Mr. May came out, and next thing I knew, we were getting shown the 5-cent tour of everything. And what struck me as amazing, it had a copper roof on the back porch.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought, God, that's pretty neat, copper. And then it had slave quarters in the basement,
Yes.
Then it had a buggy room where they kept the buggy to go to Copper Hill with all the payroll and stuff. A lot of history in that house.
Well, I'm hoping that David will remember a lot of the things his dad told him, and we can write it all down for this book I'm going to put out.
All right.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for being a listener, buddy.
Okay, before we answer Doug's question, if they need help in finding records, the Register of Deeds still is a thing, but now we have to remember we've had fires in our courthouses in the past, so some of those records have disappeared. But
records in the registrar's office are pretty pretty good back to around 1865. Previous to that, it's very spotty. Mostly stuff people come in and re-recorded.
Yes.
I
have
like the old land grant information. You could go to the archives in Nashville and get that information. So there is venues, but the real gap is between the original land grants and the transfers that took place between then and the Civil War.
Right.
Assessment records, the oldest assessment records I've seen in any book goes back to around the 1930s. Anything previous to that, I have never seen. Mm-hmm. And I haven't even had an occasion to even look for those old books in 20 years. Mm-hmm. Most of our records today were derived from information that did originally come from those old books. When they did the original computer or handwritten records and codified everything, they did take those old records and look at it and pull whatever information out of that to put into that. And then as time goes on, we've accumulated more information. The biggest thing we need is an address or an owner's name. We can find stuff on the maps at times, but mapping of property lines has changed so much where people have bought and sold. We can pull it up on the aerial photograph and you can point your finger at a particular piece of property or a particular house. We can generally tell you who owns it right now, and then you can start the process going back to the deed records and run information down on that.
So the deed records, you can get back to 1865. And that's not a perfect world either.
No.
I mean, just
well, what you have is a piece of property. You'll have the land grant from 1840. And then in 1860 something or 1870, somebody came back in and rewrote the deed, and so you lose who owned the property between those times. Well, and I know this is true too of not Pleasant Grove, Red Hill United Methodist Church. I looked at their deed work, and they had a deed that had gotten so in such a state of deterioration that they came in and had the deed redone.
Well, you got to remember our original mapping system, which was actually developed in the early 1960s and went into effect in 1963, was done off of deeds at that period of time, which a lot of them were 40 acres more or less bounded by so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and some road. You know,
that's it.
Everything else derived from talking to the people and finding out, okay, where did your line go to? Well, it's that fence out there. Okay. I had an incident when I first went to work in the assessor's office. I started my life as a mapper in the office, taking deed information and transferring it to the maps and developing the new property lines from that. And we had a gentleman come in the office one day and was complaining about his property lines being drawn wrong. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it, but I'll research it to see what I can find out. And he went on. Next week, Wayne, one of my co-workers at that time, I told him about it. He said, well, I worked on that. I never have found anything. I said, well, there's not much use in me looking at it because he'd been there for 10 years before I ever showed up. He said, no, go ahead and work on it. See if you find something I missed. Well, I started running this chain of title. Everybody talks about doing a title search. Well, that's basically what I started doing with a chain of title. Mm-hmm. And I've done a few of those for you, giving you the outline of that. And basically, you just go through, take your most recent deed, go back to the next deed, get the deed reference for the previous one, and keep going back, and you get eventually every owner of that piece of property. Simple process, takes a lot of time, but it's a simple process.
It's time consuming, and you just hope for when Arnold pulls that little card out that whoever worked on it made some notations. Sometimes there's fancy little notes on the back, just little casual notes that'll give you great hints to where the house was or the property was or where the water right-of-ways were and that kind of thing.
Well, one of the problems you run into is sometimes you'll run into a deed that doesn't have any back reference. Now, they have reference books in the Register of Deeds office, and most of this stuff is actually available online if you want to go through the process of signing up with the company that puts it online for them. And you go through and say, okay, this property sold on this date to this person. Well, you can go back to those what we call reverse index books and go back and start looking by groups of years and see where that person may have got it from somebody else. Sometimes it's a hit and miss. Maybe they never record the deed, because what a lot of people don't realize even now, there's no law that actually says you have to record a deed.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That is a voluntary thing. Now, mortgage companies and all, everybody that's involved in title business and real estate dealings want them recorded. But there's actually no law that says you have to. So you can actually write your own deed on a sheet of notebook paper, sign it, have it in front of a notary. They put their stamp on it, hand it to you. You stick it back up in your closet. Perfectly legal document. Nobody may know about it, but it's perfectly legal.
Not a good idea, but it's perfect.
So this particular case, I run this guy's title back to a tax deed. And that's where taxes got in arrears. Somebody because they had been paying their taxes, people went back and reimbursed the county for the taxes, bought it from the clerk and master, had no back reference, just 100 acres more or less. That was the limit. I'm stumped. I don't have anywhere else to go because it doesn't give me any reference at all, and even a prior owner name is not listed there. So a couple of weeks wandered by, and this gentleman come back in the office and asked me, and I said, well, I did this, and this. I got back to this tax deed, and I have no prior references. I can't go back any further. And all the descriptions that I have refer to that tax deed description of 100 acres more or less. Well, he was not a happy camper.
Well, and I understand
because, we couldn't fix his problem, which we really wanted to fix it because if the mapping is wrong, we want to get it right. So we went in and looked at that idea of trying to figure out another way to find it. I couldn't find anything. I checked some of the neighbors. I looked around some different things. One day he come in and is talking. He said, well, now, so-and-so bought 4 acres off that farm. He did. Okay. So let me research that. So I went back and I found the property owner that he was referring to. I run their title back. Found a 4-acre deed from this gentleman's ancestor or father to this gentleman. It had a deed reference. Used that deed reference. I got back in the proper chain of title and run it back to 3 deeds in deed book D, deed book I, and deed book J.
Oh, boy.
These deed books date back to 1866, 1867, and 1868, and in those 3 deeds was a full, complete description of that property.
There you go. And so was the homeowner right?
The homeowner was not exactly right, but he was closer than what our maps actually
there
showed.
You go.
I corrected the maps, made him happy, made our information correct.
There you go.
But this was a job that took overall about 2.5 months in my spare time researching this information. Because I had my regular job I had to go on to do every day anyway. But when I had a few minutes spare, I'd run down there and trace some information back.
Some of the best property information I have found is over disputes. When someone dies and the property had to go to court and be distributed, a lot of times you find great references there to, what the outbuildings look like and, the personal property. And some folks, they had 3,000 acre farm, but when they died, they had pots and pans and a bed, and that was about it.
And the other part of that is going back into the wills in the county court clerk's office and the chancery court clerk's office. Those records where they're dealing with wills and lawsuits generate a tremendous amount of information as well. So there's ways of dating a lot of what you're looking at out there. If you know that great-grandpa Joe built the house, getting your chain of title wanted back to when great-grandpa Joe bought the property. Hey, there's a clue to when that house was built.
I think what Arnold was trying to say is that if you walk up there and say, this is address, he's going to tell you that instant who built that house or what time. He may give you a lead or help you there, but it will take some research. You may have to go and look at various different places. Look, the Register of Deeds, the Assessor's Office, Chancery Court records.
Now, the Register of Deeds office, I haven't been in there a lot. I'm not a person that likes to dig through the deed books. But when I have gone in there with as much information as I can find somewhere else, I'll go in there and they'll at least they will really work hard to point me in the direction of the right book.
Yeah.
And
you got to understand, we've all got our regular jobs to do that pretty much takes up our full time. And every office up there, if you've got a question, we're going to help you in every which way we can. But there's going to be times that we're going to point and say, you need to go through this process right here. And if you get stumped, ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a lot of people in genealogy comes to our office, as Debbie well knows. They look for where great-grandpa's Joe's farm was, and they'll have a limited amount of information. Over the years, we've accumulated some bits of information. We kind of know where to look. Some things we'll point you to the historical branch. Sometimes we'll point you to the registrar's office, and then if you don't find it there, then go to the historical
Then you
branch.
you say, call Debbie Moore.
I've told one or two that a time or two.
But there is a way to do that, but it will not be easy. But there is resources, and knowing Stanley's office and Arnold here, that they will try to help you. It don't mean that it will happen at the snap. Yeah, they could go in there and say, "Oh, here's the answer for you in 5 seconds," or you say, "I have no idea." So,
well, and that's a case like a lot of people don't realize that we used a rectangular boundary survey system in the Iroquois district, which is the Indian lands. The rectangular survey program was developed by the United States government for new lands as they come into the United States and started being transferred to private ownership. Most of your lands in western Tennessee and further west all use the regular rectangular survey method, which is basically township and ranges. We are one of the few counties, Bradley, Polk, Monroe, and Summer Blunt, is the only places in the eastern part of Tennessee that actually use that, because that was developed before the Indian removal, and they did a rectangular survey and laid it out that way here. And it's kind of cockeyed because it kind of follows the angle of the ridges, which is 23 degrees off of north instead of due north and south like you see in most places. But I do, in the office over the years, I've accumulated 2 or 3 maps that actually show those township and ranges.
Oh, fun.
I mean, I can point you on there and say, this is probably pretty close, because some of the markers out there are not exactly perfect footages. You know, they wander around just a little bit. But I have that information that I can actually go through and pull out and say, okay, this is probably where you're probably needing to look in.
Mm-hmm. Pretty interesting stuff, and it doesn't take you long. You realize that the library in Chattanooga has all those maps on film that haven't been destroyed, and you can go down and for a small price make some copies of the maps. And then I've come home and made myself a little transparency, and they were laid off very neatly. And if it'd been flat land like out west, it would have been perfect. But you have to accommodate the hills and valleys here. I need to say happy 160th birthday to somebody.
Go ahead.
Well, happy 160th birthday to Cleveland Daily Banner. And this Friday from 10 to 2, they'll be having an open house, and I invite you to stop by and see those folks up there, that they're hanging on and working hard to keep us a local newspaper going here, and we need to support them.
Even Joe Cannon and Richard Melvin?
Yes.
Okay, even
so Friday the 13th from 10 to 2, you can go up and take a walk through the Cleveland Daily Banner office.
Rick Norton, the managing editor there. I wanted to say real quick, you find history in strange places. Last week, Deb and I were going up to Gatlinburg and going up 321, and we seen the Caves Cove Museum, which they've just opened up now in Blount County.
For the last 4 or 5 years, yeah.
Anyway, we walked in and started talking to a lady, and then of course, in a few minutes, told her that my family is from parts of the Cove, and if you go around 321 towards Ware Valley, you'll see Dunn Holler, and Dunn Holler is where a lot of my family's from, and related to the Lawsons and the Hedricks, and of course, if you're
at the Welcome Center in Townsend, you're standing on the Myers property, and the Myers Cemetery's there, and 3/4 of the cemetery's out of Ron's family's tree.
So, but anyway,
I, however, can't find any of my relatives. They were all on the witness protection program.
Well, that's my more fight. But anyway, I was sitting on the front porch playing with my granddaughter. Ironically, my daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter showed up at the museum. No plan. It just, they come walking in. So we had 7 generations represented then, but going back there, my granddaughter being the 7th generation from that family, and sitting on the front porch playing with her while they're still working around. And this gentleman walks up and starts talking and asked him his name. He said his name was Earl Dunn. And I said, well, we may just be related to you from this area, and find out, yes, we were. I think his great-great-grandfather was my great-great-great-grandfather. So, and so he knew my grandfather from down in Tinga, Georgia, and been there. So it's ironically, you're sitting there and you meet one of your ancestors, your relatives, just sitting in a little.
He and his wife have gathered history from that area. They're both well into their 80s, and they have all their lives have been true historians, where they have preserved pictures and stories, and she's written for national magazines and all kinds of stuff. Well, I had met her 5 or 6 years ago when I put out the Dunn Family History book, and when I walked up to introduce myself, she called my name before I said it. She remembered me. I, however, was going, please, Lord, let me remember her first name. And but anyway, she's the one I thought that they were both dead, because I had asked a couple people and they didn't know about them, and so I assumed that they had long since passed. Well, I had used a whole bunch of their pictures in my Dunn Family book.
So, and you talk about,
but I gave them credit, even though I didn't know that they were still alive or not. And they both remembered that and thanked me for giving them credit. And when we share people's pictures, we need to always remember to do that.
They, of course, those people from Townsend and Caves Cove and the mountains and the Smoky Mountain areas came here towards Bradley County because of the farmland. It was a lot flatter here. Yeah. Now, the beauty wasn't the same, but these people made their living by growing it.
They had to farm.
They come here and they could buy bigger farms cheaper than that land up there. It don't have the same beauty that those mountains does. Up there, wheat thing in the mountain, but they came here and farmed, and so the Dunn families around Polk County in North Georgia.
We thought it was ironic that they just happened to show up that day, and we just happened to show up there that day, so it was a little family reunion. It's also the Blount County Historical Society is right behind there, a little museum, but we didn't have time to go through it. But if you want to see a true dog trot log cabin that has been preserved, stop there at the Cades Cove Museum, and it was free. They didn't charge us anything to get in. Of course, we paid our membership fee for the Cades Cove Society, which was only $15 to help them out a little bit. Yeah. And I bought a book.
Yeah, so I've got
Add
one
to
more
my
book.
vast library.
It was the $150 book she started to buy in this antique store that I was saying, oh my gosh, but it was about houses being built here in Bradley County, though.
Well, it was about the Sullins, and folks that know anything about the Confederacy know that Dr. Sullins started
sitting there.
College, and his house is still standing up on McCoy Street, and I had quoted him out of that book, a Xerox copy of that book that I had found while I was writing Confederate Voices, and which is available at the Red Ribbon, by the way. And
shameless plug.
And I think if it had been a lot less than $150, it would have come home with me, because it was quite exciting, and it was a second printing. If it had been a first printing, that $150 may not have seemed so large, but I don't generally pay those kinds of prices for my books. Our DVD, our Dirt Track documentary, thank you for all you folks who have bought it. That encourages us to do other projects. Those are still available down at Central City Auto Parts. They're having a great time selling those down there to folks they haven't seen in a long time. So go see Victor down at the Central City Auto Parts. And last week we worked out a deal with the Museum Center at 5 Points that have the Dirt Track book that only had 75 of them printed, and well over half of them's gone. So if you're going to get one of those, you need to get one of them fast, because I don't know if I'm going to reprint them.
I know somebody's going to be hunting one Monday.
Yeah. And the DVDs are also available there, just our Dirt Track stuff. And they are closing today at 2, I believe. The Dirt Track exhibit is quite good. Go pay your $5 and look at it. And the race car in there is incredible. There's pictures of it before they refurbished it and afterwards, and it's the car's actually in there. But go see the folks down at the Museum Center. Support them a little bit. They're having movies down there on Thursday nights. I'm not sure what's showing this Thursday night, but a week from Thursday night, Wild River. Take your lawn chairs and go.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is one of the things they're showing. And the Love Bug. The Love Bug is the last week, so this is probably Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Say, careful how you say that. Doug called and asked about the Roth House. First thing, Mr. Roth was one of the richest people in Tennessee at the height of the copper industry. And so
he basically consolidated the copper industry from all the small companies into one large company.
And, of course, his house was right next to the railroads where they brought the copper down to ship off, so he could watch it there. And
which is probably why the railroad ended going where it went, I think. I mean, he owned that whole valley over there, all where the Magic Shelf is, and so he kind of controlled the water in that area, and he had a huge, massive farm there.
He had a general store right down below him, too, didn't he? The Roth store?
Yes, and he had a rolling mill, and I'm not sure exactly what a rolling mill is, but I think he was quite the moneymaker because he would bring the wagons full of copper to ship off down, and he would take back loads of flour that was made in his flour mill and whiskey that was made at his distillery. He'd take it back up the mountain and sell it up there, and so he was making money coming and going, which is not a bad thing.
Literally coming and going. Rolling mill is where they roll the copper into sheets or into bars or something like that. And steel it'd be like making a beam. That's my understanding what that. But now, when did he build that house, Deb? Or Mr. Calloway? Did Mr. Calloway build it for Mr. Roth?
1850s, I believe.
I think it may have started in the late 1840s, but it pretty much dates around 1850 or so.
And the brick, obviously, is...
I meant to bring my book back in Wright's time today, and I walked off and forgot it. So.
But it is I would say that it's an 1850s house. And the railroad came through in 1851. So, and the depot would have been right there. And
do you think he's responsible for that big turn that the railroad makes? It usually the railroad go pretty straight, but it makes a big turn, comes right from Deer in the Water's place over to here.
Well, it's the rule. Money, the golden rule. Right. Money rules everything.
Well, he was one of the richest men. Go ahead, call your live in or live on Old Town Cleveland.
Yes. My name's Douglas Brownlow. Yeah. And I'm the owner of the Roth House.
I love it. Tell us about it.
Well, it has a great history before the Civil War.
Okay, go ahead.
And that history has been neglected. And I've spent the last 15 years reading books about Cleveland and Cleveland's history and any reference whatsoever to the Roth House. The Calloway family, who I've talked to personally on a couple of occasions, and gotten very little short of that he had moved to the north in 1860 after he sold the house to Julius Roth. Julius Roth was under house arrest during the early part of the Civil War in Copper Hill and was not allowed to travel or for that matter, take charge of his property, which was some 3,000 acres on the farm, which was not in the city. One of the reasons why the city doesn't have much of a history going back that far is because the city wasn't that big.
Was it 1 mile square or 3 miles square?
I think it's 1 mile.
Most towns were usually 1 mile square to begin with, and Cleveland stayed that size for a number of decades.
Right. There wasn't anything east of, what was it?
Railroad.
King Edward?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the railroad was pretty much the limit of the old city limit.
Yes.
So it wasn't until the 1880s that Roth's property became part of what was 6th Ward.
Yes.
And and his rolling mill predates any reference that the history department might have as applied to what founded the industrial manufacturing interest in Cleveland. It was Mr. Julius Rott and his rolling mill that founded all of that. And it was the 3,000 acres that he left behind, and his family more or less sold it off over the next 50 years, had very little interest in Cleveland. I think his children were educated other places and had some interest in Chattanooga. So, but the point is that tunnel, which exists under my property at least now, or what remains of it, predated the Civil War. So the references that you might read in the history books is it might apply that wounded soldiers were carried through the tunnel to the old Rott House, which was a Confederate hospital, is somewhat ridiculous. Why would they do that when they could just walk across the railroad tracks and go up the hill to the house? Or that he took gold out of the house over to the railroad. This tunnel predated the Civil War, and it didn't go to the train terminal. Where it went to was the freight terminal on this side of the railroad. And the railroad went in at the Callaway's interest, I believe, that the man who sold the home to Julius Rott was a vice president of the railroad and had a
That's correct.
to do with bringing the railroad to Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So when the Confederate Army left Cleveland, they burned Julius Rott's rolling mill down.
Yes.
And he built the rolling mill because of the railroad. It became closer to go to Cleveland than it did to Dalton.
Oh, yes. And I'm not sure the railroad actually went to Dalton at that time. So I would date the rolling mill to having been there when the train opened up in 1851.
I believe you're right.
Okay. And I understand there's a gentleman here in town that's well into his 90s that says as a small boy you could enter a tunnel that went under the Roth House up past the funeral home there where the little white gas station, it used to be Dunn's Drywall in the recent years, but he said there was an entrance there also, which makes sense because all the wagons came in on 64 Highway and they all spent the night in Frogtown, which would be down on Wildwood Avenue. So it would make sense to me that would be an entrance way to the rolling mill and that area and the trains.
Yeah.
Because, see, there was no underpass then. So the traffic had to turn there to get towards the depot and the freight mill.
How many rooms are in the Roth House?
Somewhere around 12, but I'm eliminating some of them. I've eliminated every bathroom in the house except for one, and intend to remove that and go back to when the house was built. There was no indoor plumbing.
No.
And so it's my intention before I die to return the house to the. There is something that you could do to help me.
What's that?
About information. I need a picture of the southern elevation of the house. I have pictures of the east and the north and the south, but the southern elevation, I have a picture that would date somewhere around the Civil War. There's some reference in the history books that the Union soldiers, when they occupied the house,
they did.
Looked out over a veranda or some sort of porch, which I believe would have been located over the kitchen, or today's kitchen. At that time, it was just a place that they ate, which was inside the house. It wasn't, the cooking was done outside.
I believe Myra Inman talks about the Ohio Drum Corps being up on the hill there, and they would play tunes at night as the sun went down.
So a picture of that veranda
Okay.
would allow me to remove what I think is a porch room, probably completed sometime around 1960. Maybe the May family had something to do with adding that particular room to the house, but I do want it to be removed, or at least stripped back to what it was original.
Mm-hmm.
And
How does your brick hold up, Mr. Brownlow? I mean, do you have seepage?
doing fine.
Great.
I think the brick has, its history is probably somewhere around Arnold School, or there was some brickyard or something that was over that
Yes.
direction. But the mortar is showing signs of age. And then when they turned around and made a truck route and redesigned Linden Avenue, and during sometime around the millennium is when they started that construction, they also, all of that traffic exhaust and the vibration of the 18-wheelers running through here in and around
Doesn't help, does it?
certainly doesn't help the preservation of the exterior of the house. As yet, it has no paint on it, and I really have no interest in doing anything like that.
No.
Some sort of epoxy.
Well, I'm thinking that maybe we can talk to the fellow that's refurbishing the Me house that he's reconstructed things or preserved things in Savannah. He might be the very person to tell you how to preserve that, or how to replace the caulking where you need to, or the mortar where you need to. I would think that it could be a Parks bricks or the Taylor bricks, or most anybody. Now, occasionally you get really lucky that whoever made the bricks would put their thumbprint or their initials or something in the brick. So the next time you have a loose brick, take a close look at it and see.
Oh, it's my intention to look at every brick I can get my hands on.
I appreciate it so much. It's
all the time.
when you get a house the age of your house, it's not like buying a house. It's like adopting something for your lifetime, and you never get it all finished, and it's easy to give up. But I appreciate the fact that you're still plugging at it, and I would like the opportunity sometime to come see your house.
Well, we could work that out.
Okay, sounds good. And I definitely want it to be one of the houses that's highlighted in my book.
Right. The oldest date that I can come up with is as a matter of referencing other documents.
Yes.
Books is 1833, and that puts it before the removal. And the Calloway family should be able to date their movement in this area, in the Bradley County area, to the survey team that actually came in long before the removal and surveyed the property and even cut little pieces out for themselves.
Oh yes, all the best
Definitely.
pieces. Well, I have no idea. I just know it's pre-Civil War, and I know Mrs. Hardwick had a house up there too on that road, and there's an old picture of T-models lined up the road that you can still see her house, and it would be a northern picture looking south, so that wouldn't help you any with your porch. But there were several really nice houses up there in that area at that time.
I do feel that the brick mason that had something to do with the Episcopal Church in town,
yes,
which dates back to 1867, that there are brick crosses in that Episcopal church that surround the tower.
Yes.
Well, those same crosses show up on the third floor, the west elevation of the Rot House.
Okay.
So the mason, there's a tie there somewhere.
What about the First Cumberland Presbyterian Church that's down on McCoy Street? That's 1840s or so. Have you compared? Because there wasn't a standard size of brick. Sometimes we can kind of guesstimate that some, who the bricks may have belonged to by looking at the size and shape of them. I spend a lot of time out of my car in weeds up to my knees looking at stuff.
Well, maybe I can get you an old brick from the house, and you can.
I would like to see one.
Till you match it up.
That sounds wonderful, but we'll be in touch. And thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for calling in and sharing with our listeners today.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye. Well, that just goes to prove sometimes our listeners know a whole lot more than we do. And I always love it when they call in and share what they know and, open up. Basically, he opened up his knowledge, and that helps. I mean, he's obviously, especially someone that focuses on one piece of property. It can be very frustrating, but one piece of property will.
I always tell people, your own house better than anybody else.
Yeah, and I'm thinking here in my head that I have a picture of an old hotel that I don't think that it'll show the southern end of that house either, but it shows it peeking out the back of that one, I think, too. Thank you so much to our listeners and to Arnold, who I didn't let talk much at all today, but that's what he's here for, to back me up. Next week, we think we're going to have some live music on the show.
We're going to talk about all the old guitar pickers that around this area, and we hope to have a couple of these guys that you have heard of and talked to, and we hope to get one guy who's very seldom ever seen during daylight.
We think he might be a vampire. We don't know.
We really think he is, but if we can get him here.
But we're going to get some pickers together just to come in and talk about the pickers that they remember, Sam Hills.
The Sam Hills and the
Claytons
Suits.
And the Suitses and all those folks. And Gene Woods and Ron's dad, the Moore brothers.
Doyle
Dykes and all those fellas. So
we'll
be talking music next week. The following week we haven't confirmed a show yet, but we're working on some stuff. And the last,
I've got an idea.
Oh no, Ron's got an idea.
I ain't gonna tell you yet.
We've got a show coming the last week in June that Debbie Riggs, that wrote a book about the two monuments, the Confederate monument and the Memorial Monument that recently got injured, but we understand it's under repair. She has written a book, and she's having those reprinted. And
that book's been out for some time too. So,
2 or 3 years, and they're all gone now. But the good news is they are in the processes of being reprinted. And we're going to get someone to come in and talk about the Confederate monument, someone to talk about, and Debbie's going to be talking about that little monument.
If I'm not mistaken, wasn't it dedicated to July 2nd or 3rd or something? July, wasn't it?
June 3rd is the Confederate Decoration Day.
Yeah.
So I think it was dedicated in June of 1912.
That would have been the Confederate monument.
Yes.
The other monument,
I don't know.
I think it's July 2nd or something.
Well, we'll
see. There are two monuments there, and we're going to tell you the story on both
July
of them.
2nd.
July 2nd, Debbie's saying.
Aha. So I was actually right once.
And you have a witness, Arnold and Debbie.
Yeah. And
was
all
the boys
the
dead.
many listeners.
But anyway, we're going to be talking about the train wreck that took the lives of those young men, and we're going to be talking about the movement of getting the monument up. We'll talk about the big fight that went on about whose monument was going to be there, the Confederate monument or the Memorial
Civil
Monument.
War almost broke out again.
I think
in Cleveland.
I'll let invite Brian Reed to call in and talk about the Grand Army of the Republic Monument that's up at Fort Hill that very few people know about. And there's only like 3 of them in the state of Tennessee, and Cleveland has one. And
we tried to hide it.
No, we didn't. And we will talk about some other of the monuments that are missing, and maybe the historical markers that are missing
all
that day.
Historical markers.
So it's all things historical on that day.
Right.
And Arnold, thanks again for coming in.
Good sports every Thursday night, almost every Thursday night. Summer months are tough because of work schedules and Tommy's son plays baseball.
Brian's son played some baseball, and he's been under the weather too.
When football rolls around, they'll be back on full blast.
I understand Dustin, who graduated from college now, He's been going to college the last 2 years. Got his bachelor's degree a couple
Woo.
weeks ago, and I think he's talking about coming back and helping some.
Yeah, he mentioned that he might be interested in popping back in, and I told him we'll be glad
Just
to have him.
pop anytime, huh?
Yeah.
So next week we'll have guitar pickers. Tomorrow, It's a Dirt Track Life will be at the East Tennessee Historical Museum in downtown Knoxville. Free showing, free visit to the museum, so it's well worth the drive up there. Tuesday night and next Saturday we'll be showing Caney Creek. Tuesday night we'll be at the McDonald Black Fox Rutan Club. Next Saturday we'll be at the Living History Museum in Athens. There's a small charge. I mean, it's like $4 or something, and you get to see the museum too. Support your museums. That's the only way they stay open. And I think I'm ready to say goodbye.
Arnold, your office, tell them where that is.
We're in the courthouse annex, otherwise known as the old post office. We're in the very back. Just about anybody in the courthouse or anywhere usually points everybody to us as the first stop to start hunting information.
That's right. You just go in the old post office and past the election commission office and go to the back door.
So you 50 people out there who want to know where your house is. Only 5 of you can show up on Monday, and 5 of you can show up on Tuesday, and so you 50 need to work out which ones are coming. Though.
Find all the information you can find on your own, and then go in and ask for help. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. We appreciate you being with us every week and listening to us and calling in and adding to the conversation. It's always good. And we'll see you.
Well, I got to do my clothes here.
Oh, well.
We got to do the thing.
Ready, set, go.
You've got to write down this history. You got to get the old pictures from out from under the bed and out of the closet, out of the shoe boxes. Get someone in your family, get some little white stickers. Write down who and what that picture is about. Share those pictures with people, because you never know what those pictures may bring back memory to other people. The people who worked with your grandfathers, people who worked with your dads, people who shopped at this store, at that market, drove that type of car. There's all kind of things that people bring back their memories. And until you write it down, until you record it, it's not going to be there. Every time that we have someone die, some history dies with them unless we do that. We'll always remember Pearl Harbor, but Deb?
Will we remember Aunt Pearl?
That's
Have
right.
a good week, y'all.
Hey, folks, we'll see you next week here on Old Town Cleveland.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
You need money overnight? Check into cash. Your time.